Okay, so this video is going to be about politics and political ideologies, and it's a very basic thing for anybody who's interested, so that you can know a little bit about what people are talking about when they talk about socialism or liberalism or conservatism or some of the others. Um, so I'm just going to try to explain what these basic political ideologies are and how they fit into politics and government. And hopefully, if you know a bit about what liberalism is, or what socialism is, or what conservatism is, or that kind of thing, then it might help you to sort of decide who you're going to vote for if you're going to go vote in an election. If you like one of these ideas, then you can go with that one. I'm going to try to be extremely unbiased in all my explanations. Now, I do have my own preferences, but I'm trying to give you the information in a very neutral way, so that I'm not trying to press you into agreeing with me about anything, or into thinking that you should vote for this or that, or to be trying to convert you or indoctrinate you in any way. This is just the basic sort of facts of what these things are about. So here we go. Now, a lot of people, when they talk about politics and political ideas, they talk about left wing and right wing, and you might have seen people on the internet calling each other lefties, or saying that you're right wing, or you're lefty, you're far right, or you're far left, or they're left wing extremists, or they're right wing nut jobs, or that kind of thing. So I'm going to start with trying to explain what it means left wing and what means right wing, what those two things are. And basically, this is called the political spectrum, and the political spectrum is like a big line, and at one end you've got fascism and the Nazis and all that. At the very other end you've got communism and anarchism and all that, and then sort of in the middle you've got liberalism and centrism and whatever. And depending on how extreme your views are in one direction or the other, then you're further left or further right. It's quite difficult to explain what left wing means in totality, what right wing means in totality, but I'll give it a go. But there are various different interpretations of what it means by being left wing, what it means being right wing. Sometimes people argue, they say, I'm the real left wing and you're not really left wing, and left wing is what I'm doing, not what you're doing. Same with right wing. And also, if you don't like the right wing, then you might have a different idea of what they are from the people who are right wing, from what they think they are. And if you're left wing, then your idea of what left wing means might be different from what people who don't like left wing think it's about, or say it's about. So it is a bit complicated, but basically, anyone who's a conservative, or is in a party which is called Conservative Party, or calls themselves conservatives, you could say that they are right wing. And anyone who calls themselves a socialist or a communist or something like that, then you would say that they were left wing. Now, there's also liberal, and that's a very confusing term, because that really can mean right wing, or it can be left wing, or it can be right wing. But we'll put that aside. But a lot of American people in America, they use the word liberal to mean left wing. Americans tend to say he's a liberal or he's a conservative, and when they say conservative, they mean right wing, and when they say liberal, they mean left wing. And that's just sort of the way they talk. That's just sort of culturally how it works in America. when they say liberal, they mean left wing. Whereas in Australia, for example, they have two political parties. One is left wing and one is right wing. The left wing one is called the Labour Party, and the right wing one is called the Liberal Party. So the Liberals in Australia are the right wing guys, whereas the Liberals in America are the right wing or left wing guys. So it's a bit confusing, all these terms and stuff. But another thing that people say is progressive and conservative, and progressive is sort of towards left wing or on the road that goes left wing. Where do the terms left wing and right wing come from? That's a good starting point. During the French Revolution, when they were setting up the Estates General, which was like a parliament type of thing, the people who wanted loads of change and wanted things to get better and wanted things to be improved and wanted to have sort of reforms and maybe revolution, they sat on the left side of the king, and the people who wanted to keep things the same and not change things, they sat on the right side of the king. And that's how this thing started, this idea of left and right. So that's quite a good, maybe that's a good way to get into it. So we could say that the left wing is sort of people who are critical of the way society works and how government works and things like that, and what people think and how people do things. And they want to change it and change it to something else. And they want new ideas to come in and new ways of thinking to come in, and for people to change society. And a lot of things about society that they see as being unfair or not right, and they want to fix them. Whereas right wing, sort of, that right wing people usually, they more kind of don't want to do changes and things, and they like things the way that they are or the way they have been traditionally, and they either want to keep things as they are now and stop the left wing people from trying to change stuff, or they want to go back to how things were before a bit because they think that things have changed too much and the left wing people have had too much influence. So that's kind of the basics of it. Now, for example, you could take something like racism, for example. Now, racism is, I'm not being too biased if I say I think racism is a bad thing, but people who are really, really, really racist, they're considered as far right or as the extreme right. Because it used to be, back in the days, it used to be normal to be racist, and it was like good, it was all right to be a massive racist back in the past, hundreds of years ago. So these racist people, they're sort of, they have these ideas that used to be all right hundreds of years ago, and they don't like the way that we've sort of changed and developed to be not racist, and they think that not being racist, that's left wing, but most people think that there's nothing that left wing about not being racist, but that if you are racist, then you're far right, and also if you're a communist and you really want to completely change society and like make it so that there's no such thing as property and that nobody owns anything and everyone's equal, or you're an anarchist and you think that there should be no sort of power or government whatsoever and everyone should be completely free to do whatever they want or whatever, then that's extreme change into the future kind of a thing, and that's left, that's far left and extreme left, and some people on the right wing think that anyone who's a little bit left wing is a far left, and some people who are a little bit right wing think that, some people who are left wing think that anyone who's a little bit right wing is a Nazi or a fascist or something. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's quite difficult with the right wing left wing thing, and it has all these different ways that it manifests itself. For example, some of left-wing thought is about wanting poor people to have better opportunities and rich people to have to pay more tax so that you can have more stuff for poor people, and things about ideas about everyone being equal, and things like that. And that's kind of socialism, or wanting to be socialist. And another part of left wing is more to do with not being racist, and not being sexist, and black people and people of different colors having equality, and there not being any sort of racism in society, and also to do with that women's rights and feminism as well, and to do with women not being oppressed and kept down, and also things to do with homosexual people, that they should be allowed to be homosexual and have the same rights as other people, and all that kind of thing. So, and these ideas, you might say, are more about liberalism, because they're more about people being free to do what they like, right, and to be respected, and they're not so much to do with socialism, because socialism is about people having the same stuff and the same sort of lifestyle, the same sort of life comforts, and being equal. And sometimes you could say that both those ideas are sort of things that have developed, and people coming up with new ideas about not being racist, and that it's all right to be gay, and stuff. Whereas like right wing is sort of closer to how people thought in the past, and they sort of think, well, why can't we be a bit racist, or why can't we be a little bit sexist? We always have been in the past, some people might say, but you'd call those guys sort of extreme right. Whereas the degree to which you are right wing or left wing depends on how extreme you think the other side is, and to what extent you are against them. So you might be quite left wing, and you might be a socialist, and you might think that rich people should have to pay more tax, and that there should be more hospitals, and that there shouldn't be any poverty, and everyone should be equal. But then you might not agree with trans rights, for example, and you might think that the trans rights is a load of rubbish. That might be your opinion, and therefore you might get other people calling you right wing because you don't agree with the trans thing, but you don't consider yourself right wing, you consider yourself left wing because of everything else you believe. So it's really complicated, but when you get used to it, and when you start sort of thinking yourself as left wing or as right wing, then you kind of get to sort of, you get a sort of a sense of it, or a feeling of it, of these guys are right wing, or these guys are left wing, and that I'm left wing, or I'm right wing, or I'm mostly left wing, or I'm mostly right wing, or I'm extremely left wing, or I'm extremely right wing, or I'm a little bit left, or I'm a little bit right. You know what I mean? Or I'm dead center, and I'm 50-50, a bit left and a bit right. But I think one of the good ways to understand it is sort of right wing is more to do with sort of traditional ideas, and ideas that people have had that have lasted for long times, and that left wing is sort of to do with sort of newer, more recent ideas going into the future and wanting to change things more. Because when right wing people want to change things, they usually want to change them as in get rid of stuff they don't like that has developed, and go back to how things were before somehow. Whereas left wing people want to sort of change things, and sort of create these new ways that no one's ever had before. So yeah, I mean, I hope that doesn't sound too confusing, but that is the confusing thing, left wing and right wing, that those terms are so ambiguous, and they're so open to interpretation, and everybody sort of uses them differently, and it is confusing, and it can be quite annoying, because you can have an argument with somebody about left wing and right wing, but you're both talking about different things, because you have a different idea of what it means to be left wing, or what it means to be right wing. But it is important to know that there are these two camps, as it were, these two directions of political thought, left wing and right wing. So I'll leave that bit there, and then I'll go into some of the more easier, manageable, specific political ideas. And I'm going to start with the ones which are most prevalent in sort of Western democracies, and then after that I'll go into some of the more extreme ones and some of the more specific ones. So in my country, we have two big political parties, um, and of some countries have various different ones. And sometimes when you look at a political party, you can see what ideology it calls itself in the name. So if a party is called the Socialist Party of Germany or whatever, then you know that that party, they kind of think of themselves as being socialist, and socialism is what they're about. And if a party is called the Conservative Party of Britain, then you know that what they're about is being conservative, and that conservatism is the political ideology. And that kind of helps you kind of know what they're about. In some countries and some parties have weird, obscure names that don't actually mean anything and don't give you any indication of what they're about and where they fit in and what their political ideology is all about. So I think maybe in Czech Republic, for example, they've got these really weird names like Top Nine and Yes and stuff, and they don't really give you any indication of what they're about. It's just a name. And now that can be because the parties are more of a mix of different ideologies, and they don't really subscribe to one in particular, and it's more mixed up, so they can't sort of say that they're a conservative party or that they're a socialist party or that they're a liberal party, because they're sort of a big mix of various bits and pieces. So maybe that's the reason why, but it's a lot easier and simpler, in my opinion, when it's a socialist party or a communist party or a conservative party or a liberal party or something like that. You know what it is. Um, so, so we'll start with conservative and conservatism. Conservatism is about not changing things too much and sort of keeping things the way they are. And conservatives look at society and they think, well, things kind of have happened and grown naturally over the centuries and over the years, and the things that we have, and the system of government that we have, and the economy and how it works, and how the ideas that people have, and the way that people organize themselves in society, and the relations of power, and the relations of wealth, and the relations between ethnic groups, and the relations between the sexes, and all those things. The way that they've developed naturally is quite good enough, and that's worth defending. And the reason why it's developed that way is because it's sort of good, it's natural. And that if you're going to go along and say that this or that is unfair and it needs to be changed, then you're probably wrong. And that the institutions that we have in society and the way things are being done, that's all good, and we should keep that. And if you're whinging and complaining about it, then you don't know what you're talking about. And if you're going to try to come up with something better than what we already have, then it's not going to be as good, because you're going to be like just one person trying to think of something, and it's not as good. And if we do change society and we have a revolution or something, or we have a government that makes loads of changes based on your ideas of fixing everything and making things better, then it probably won't be better. It will probably end up being worse than what we have at the moment. Also, the Conservatives defend and argue against all the arguments that people have against society and against the way we do things. So if someone says, well, capitalism is rubbish and we shouldn't have capitalism, then the Conservatives will say, no, capitalism is good, it works right, it makes people rich and it makes things get done. And your ideas about getting rid of it is going to be rubbish, and what you're going to have instead is going to be not going to be very good. And if you say, well, we shouldn't have a king or a queen, you know, it's rubbish, then the Conservative would say, well, we've got a king or a queen, and it's good having a king or a queen because they sort of whatever you would create instead wouldn't be as good, you know. And conservatives can be a bit different depending on which country they're in, you know, because every country has a bit of a different society. So the thing that you're being conservative about, that it will be different in different countries, you know. So like in America, they have guns, and people have the right to carry guns around, and that's in their constitution that you can have a gun. And the conservatives in America are saying, oh yeah, we should have guns, and we've got to protect people's right to have guns. And a lot of the people who they call liberals, that they say, well, no, we shouldn't have guns. We should change things so that you don't have guns anymore. So the conservatives are defending something that they have in their culture and their society that's been there for a long time against people who want to make changes. Now there are certain particular things in some societies that the conservatives are defending and wanting to keep going, and against people who want to change things. And so another thing is religion. So if you live in a country where it's quite religious, and religion is really important and an important part of your country, then the conservatives will be sort of saying, let's keep this religion and everything. And people who are atheists and want to change it and get rid of the religion, then they're going to be arguing with the conservatives, because the conservatives will be saying, no, we don't want to change this because it's good. We like having all the religion and everything. Another thing about conservatism is that quite often the biggest sort of idea against them is socialism. And socialists want to change society, and they don't like capitalism so much because they think it's unfair, and they don't like that there's so much unfairness and inequality in society, the socialists. And quite often, if you're living in a country where there is or has been quite a lot of inequality, and there is a system of capitalism, then the conservatives in those countries might say, well, we don't want socialism, we don't want socialists, because the capitalism is good, and the way we do things is with rich people being rich is good, and socialism wouldn't work, you know. So there are different ways to be conservative, and conservatives tend to be different in different countries depending on, you know, what it's like where they are. But the important thing to remember is that it's about sort of protecting and keeping the stuff that you've got that you like, and not trying to change it and stuff. Now, sometimes conservatives can be annoyed that things have changed, and they don't like that these things have changed, and they prefer things the way they were before. Now, sometimes they can be called reactionaries. Reactionary sort of means that you're not just conservative, that you want to go back to how things were before and change things, but change things to make them the way they used to be before, or the way you think they used to be before, you know, rather than you know. So there might be some people who don't think democracy is good, you know, and they want to go back to living in a society where there isn't democracy. Or there might be some people who think that not being racist isn't very good, and that we should go back to being racist, you know. But those people would be called reactionary, not conservative, especially if they live in a society where part of the sort of everyday and normal understanding of everything and is not being racist, you know. So yeah, so conservative can have different meanings, but it basically is to be understood as sort of keeping things the way they kind of are in society, or the way they've naturally developed to be, and sort of appreciating the institutions and stuff that you have and the way things are done in the society, rather than sort of saying that things aren't fair and things aren't right, and that you want to change them or make them better somehow by coming up with something new, you know. So that's conservatism. And if you see a political party that calls itself conservative, then it's likely to be against the socialists, and it's likely to be Anyway, so there's conservatism and conservatives. One of the great conservative philosophers was this guy called Edmund Burke, who was an Englishman, an Irish guy who lived in the 18th century. And he saw the French Revolution, and he thought that the French Revolution was terrible because of all the violence and everything. And he thought that if they hadn't been so wanting to change everything, and they'd been satisfied with France and living in France and accepting the institution of France, then we wouldn't have all this revolution and violence. And that what he got from trying to change things was basically making everything worse. So anyway, and some famous conservatives. Well, in America, the Republican Party considers itself to be the conservative party of America, and people who like the Republicans call themselves conservatives, and they believe that you should have guns, and they believe that socialism is a lot of rubbish, and they believe that women shouldn't get abortions, and they believe, that Christianity is good and that America is a Christian country. They believe that capitalism is great, and they believe that being American is brilliant, and America is a great country. So in Britain we've got the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party believes that socialism is a lot of rubbish, and they believe also that having the Queen and the royal family is good, and they believe that we shouldn't change things too much, and they believe that somehow Britain is a great country, and so yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be fair to say that like Nazis are conservatives, because they're not really the same thing. You could say that conservatives are right wing, but being right wing, if you're a conservative and you call yourself right wing, then you think that right wing is good and that conservative is good, and there's nothing about really to do with like Nazis or Hitler or any of that, or racism really in conservatism, because conservatism basically is sort of about keeping things the same and not changing them too much, really. Anyway, we're going to move on now to socialism. Socialism is quite a new political idea. Well, it started in the 19th century, and what it's about equality, mostly economic equality. So socialists believe that it's not fair that some people just get really, really rich, and then they give their kids all their money, and then they're really rich, and then they give theirs and they're really rich, and you've got all these really rich people who are like on top, and they can do whatever they want, and they just have a better life. And even if they don't do anything, they're still rich, and they don't even have to work necessarily to become rich, because they get it from their parents or whatever, or they're lucky and they just get rich, and then they've got all the stuff, and they're super wealthy and everything. And then there are other people, usually a larger part of the people, who don't have anything and are poor, and they work hard, and they do, they go to work every day, but they have to struggle to pay the rent and stuff, and they don't and to eat and everything, and they're getting abused, and the system is unfair, because the rich people run everything, and they just sort of exploit everybody else, and it's completely unfair, the whole system of society. And this capitalism is a load of rubbish, they believe, because capitalism is rich people getting rich, and then being rich, and then getting richer at the expense of everybody else. And socialists want, for example, for everybody to have some sort of opportunity to get stuff without having to be rich. So they say that hospitals should be free, and everyone should be able to go to hospital, and that to pay for the hospitals, then the government should take the money off the rich people, and use it to provide hospitals for everybody, or education. It shouldn't just be that you have to pay to go to school. School should be free, and the rich people should pay more taxes than the poor people, so that we can have the schools, the teachers, and everything. So socialism is basically about making the rich people not be allowed to just get super infinitely rich, but for them to have to pay a bit back to everybody else, so that the government can sort of take the money and then use it to give stuff for everybody else, so that everybody has something, and it doesn't have to be just that the rich have everything all the time and get richer and richer, and the poor get poorer and poorer. Now, socialism is also a bit of a vague concept, because there are different types of socialism. For example, in a democracy, in a democratic country like Britain or France, a socialist is someone who wants to go in elections and is part of democracy, and then they get in elections, and then they get into government, and then they don't want to sort of kill rich people and take all their stuff. They just want to make the tax system so that rich people have to pay sort of a slightly higher percentage in tax than the poor people, or pay a bigger bit of their money than the poor have to pay of theirs, and then the government would sort of provide more stuff like hospitals and schools and things like that for everybody to have, including people who haven't got any money. And that's sort of quite moderate, really, or they might create railways or give money to old people or whatever. And that's quite sort of moderate form of socialism, because they're not saying we're going to get rid of capitalism altogether, or that you can't be rich. They're sort of saying that, well, you don't need to be infinitely super rich so that everybody else is having to be miserable, we can have a bit of both, and we can look after everybody in the country and give everybody a little bit of something, so the world doesn't have to be this dog eat dog, big fish eats a little fish kind of a system. Now the capitalist guys and the people on the conservative side will say, well, no, that's not rubbish, because then people will be lazy and they won't want to work hard, because you've got to be sort of poor and miserable to make yourself want to work and do well for yourself. And they also say that socialism is a lot of rubbish, because why are people going to work hard to be rich and successful if when they get rich and successful they have their money taken off of them and given to some poor guys who haven't done anything, So, and they also, some people say, well, the capitalist system works properly and the socialist system doesn't. But, it depends on your opinions and what you think is fair or not fair, or what you think works better or whatever. And sometimes it depends on whether you yourself are rich or poor. I mean, if you're rich, then you're probably going to think that capitalism is great. But if you're poor, then you might like the idea of socialism, because then you're going to get stuff for yourself and your family that you can't have at the moment because you've not done well out of capitalism. So socialists are sort of against capitalism, but there's different degrees to how much they want to do and what they want to do about it. So in a democratic country like Britain, for example, or France, or Spain or whatever, that they just want to get into government and then sort of make rich people pay a bit more tax and then provide a bit more stuff for everybody else. And that's the gist of it, Whereas in the Soviet Union, with Stalin and all that in Russia, back when they were communists. Now, communists they sometimes communists call themselves socialists because they want to be against capitalism and they want to sort of make things more equal and provide stuff for everybody. But the way that these communists, these guys like Stalin in Russia, the way they want to do things is to have no democracy, and then so that there's no chance of people deciding that they don't want the equality and voting for something different. So there's going to be no democracy, and you're going to have a dictatorship, and there's going to be one dude or one group of people in power, and they're going to control everything and make everybody equal and make everybody the same, and nobody's going to have any private property at all, and you can't have any money. You're all going to be the same, and the state is going to make it so that you have to be like that by force. And that's kind of sort of communism, the way we understand communism as what happened in Russia and China and Vietnam and other countries in the 20th century. So a lot of people obviously don't like the idea of communism because not only is it you can't be rich and stuff, but it's also you can't vote and have freedom in elections. So that's an authoritarian style of that's authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is you being told what to do and you can't have any freedom. That's authoritarianism for socialism to exist, and they want to make socialism by using the state and nobody having any freedom or choice or say in the matter. And if you go over to back to the right wing guys, now you've got authoritarians on the far right as well, who like Hitler and the Nazis, and they said we're going to use the government and the force. No one's going to have any democracy in case they want to do something left wing or socialist. So we're going to make everything unequal and say that you're better than them and all the rest of it, and force inequality on everybody through the state and no democracy. So it's not just the left wing and socialism that has this. It's not just socialists who sometimes have this totalitarianism or authoritarianism and get rid of democracy. It's not, and so you can't have any freedom. It's not just the left that do that. So the right also do it, and it's not just socialists that do it. For socialism, it's sometimes that you have these fascists. And fascism is basically saying that you want to have capitalism and you want to have inequality, and you're gonna not have any democracy because you're worried that people might want to have socialism in a democracy. So you can have socialism in a democracy, and you can have socialism in an authoritarian state, and the same as you can have capitalism in a democracy, and you can have capitalism in an authoritarian state as well. So a lot of people who come from countries where they used to have communism, they think that socialism just means no freedom and no democracy, but that's not what we understand it in the English speaking world. That's not really the way we understand it. A lot of Americans think that socialism means that as well, because they haven't really had the idea of socialism in a democracy. So the word is confused again, the word socialism, because some people think that it just means sort of like Stalin and all that and communism, whereas if you're a member of the French Parliament or the German Parliament or the British Parliament, then socialism is what most people kind of want a bit of, and it's part of what you're doing in the country, and you have a little bit of it, and it has nothing to do with authoritarianism or the state telling you what to do all the time or not being able to vote. So it's a bit confusing for people. Now, if you like socialism, then you might tend to sort of emphasize how it's a democratic thing, and if you really hate it, then you might try to say that it's undemocratic or it's not free or whatever. So anyway, socialism is about more equality, basically. Conservatism is about keeping things the same, not changing things too much. And then we come to the third one is liberalism. Now, liberalism is the idea that people should be free, basically. Now, there are two meanings of this. One meaning of it is that you should be able to sort of do what you like normally in life, and you should be able to say what you want and think what you want, and sort of, not be told what to do all the time, or told you can't do this, or told you can't do that by a government or some other people. Liberalism also is about democracy and saying that people should be able to choose who they want to be their leaders in government, and then should be able to change them, if they don't like them. So most sort of modern Western countries are sort of already liberal. The society is liberal because most people sort of agree and accept that you pretty much can do what you want most of the time, as long as you're not hurting anyone else. Yes, of course, there are some things that you have to do, but on the whole, you're not being completely controlled and told what to do all the time by somebody else. You're kind of free. And when it comes to politics and elections, then you go and you vote and you choose who you want to be in the government. So yeah, and you can complain and say it's not perfect in this country or in that country, but basically, we kind of already have liberalism, and we kind of live in liberal countries now. America and Britain and France and other they are liberal already, and it's a bit confusing because Americans say they don't like liberals, but in terms of what it actually means, the actual proper meaning of liberalism as a political ideology, then that's what they've got, and that's what they're quite happy having, but they just use the word liberal as a sort of insulting word for people who might be socialists or might be particularly interested in not being racist or in women's rights or whatever it is that they might not like. So it's really confusing again with liberalism, but liberalism, the idea sort of came around in the sort of 17th century when people were going against the kings and sort of saying we want to have representation. And then you had John Locke, and then you had the American Revolution, and these ideas about governments and freedom and stuff. And you have these thinkers like John Stuart Mill in England who said that people should be allowed to do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting anyone else or harming anybody else. So the law comes in, the police come around only when you're bothering someone else. So that's kind of how we are, in most countries, or most Western countries now. Europe and America. So you haven't got someone telling you you've got to dress this way or you've got to say this or think this. You've got sort of freedom to think what you want and say what you want and do what you want as long as you're not, hurting anyone else. And then every 5 years or whatever, you get to go and vote in an election for who you want to be in charge. So that's really what liberalism is. Now, liberalism sort of unites and comes together with socialism a little bit against some conservatives a little bit when we start talking about things like women's rights or ethnic equality and stuff, because obviously in the past women were not equal to men, and black and white people were not treated the same, and gay people were not accepted and tolerated. So there had to be changes in the way people think to make it so that people aren't being racist anymore or not being sexist anymore, and against people who wanted to keep the system of being racist and sexist, if you know what I mean. But I mean that people wanting to be racist or wanting to be sexist, that isn't sort of proper conservatism in the way of protecting the institutions. But some people think that some conservatives think that women shouldn't be the same as men, but they're not the same as men, and that trying to make women sort of equal to men is like saying that you want women to be like men, and they shouldn't be like men. They should be women, and women are different from men, and maybe they should be in the kitchen, or they shouldn't be working, or whatever it is. Some conservatives might have that idea. Of course, not all of them. There's nothing about being conservative that says you have to be like that and have that view about women. But people would say that that's a conservative view to have. If you're saying women should stay in the kitchen, then that's a conservative view. If you say that women shouldn't be working, that's a conservative view. Or you could say it's a backwards view or a reactionary view, and liberalism, because liberalism is about people being free to do whatever they want, as long as they're not hurting anybody else, then that idea comes into conflict with some of the traditional ways people have thought, and which is that they've thought that if you're black, then then it's all right for people to have a go at you and treat you badly, and you're not allowed to do things that other people can do. You can't go and sit on a bench next to a white person, or you can't get on the bus and sit next to a white person. Now that's the sort of prejudices and the opinions and the culture that already exists in a society coming into conflict with the idea of the individual rights, because the individual then is not free. If you're black and you're living in the 1950s in America, in Alabama, then you're not being free to do what you like as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, because it doesn't hurt anybody else. If you being black and going in a restaurant with white people, that you should be allowed to do that. It doesn't hurt anybody else at all. So and if you're a woman and people are saying, well, you can't have a job because you're a woman, but then that's again, you're not free, to do what you want to do, and you're not trying to hurt anybody else. And the only reason why you're being stopped is because of these prejudices and these ideas that people have. And sometimes these ideas that people have and these prejudices are part of the culture of the society, and that's what, if you're liberal, you want to change that. So I think that's why and when you're looking at that, you've got liberalism as in the individual freedoms coming into conflict with the idea of conservatives that keep things the way they are, including all the ideas and stuff, and not wanting to change to say that we're not going to be racist anymore, or that we're going to treat women differently or whatever. And you've got a little bit of sometimes this conflict going on there between the idea of liberalism, meaning sort of all about freedom, individual freedom, and the sort of what society says, on the other. But also, liberalism is also about individual freedom. And when you come to talking about capitalism, well, capitalism is about individual freedom, the freedom to go and do business and make money and stuff as well. So the people in the 19th century, they didn't want the government telling you couldn't do business and make money for yourself and stuff and have nice things, because liberals were saying, well, that's part of freedom. So then you've got liberals being against the socialists as well, because the socialists are saying that they want people not to have so much freedom to be super rich and whatever, and they want the government to get involved a bit more. So it's the three ideologies sort of come into conflict against each other. And sometimes you find things where the left wing, the socialists and the liberals sort of agree on stuff because their ideologies sort of converge, and put them against the conservatives. And a lot of people would consider that the conservatives are right wing and that liberals and socialists are left wing, and that socialists are further left wing, more left wing than liberals. And that's one way of looking at it. If you were going to put them on a line, you'd put the conservatives sort of on the right sort of side of the line, then you'd put the liberals sort of near the middle, but maybe slightly on the left of the middle, and then you'd put the socialists sort of further on the left. But they're really interested in three different things, and it's important to say that conservatism in general really means sort of not changing things too much and keeping things the same and liking things the way they've developed naturally through history developing. Liberals want people to have more freedom and individual rights and freedom for people and democratic rights and stuff. And that socialists want to make society more fair and equal by making sure people have enough food to eat and healthcare and all the rest of it, and that rich people don't just be the only ones that get stuff and get everything at the expense of everybody else. So yeah, those are the three big sort of main ideologies of sort of Western, like British and American, mostly I'd say British, North American, but also European. Those three ideologies are sort of three of the big important ideas that have come about in the last sort of 200 years and have come to be the main ones. But of course, you can mix bits of them together, and you could say I'm liberal about this and I'm conservative about that. You could say, well, I don't like I don't think women should be equal. I think women should stay in the. I think women should stay in the kitchen, but I think that rich people should pay loads of tax. You know, so you might have a mix of different things, but quite often people tend to sort of find that their views about things do kind of fit into one of these groups. And if you, for example, if you think immigration is bad, then you might also probably be likely to think that women should be in the kitchen, and that rich people shouldn't have to pay too much tax. And if you think that if you think that racism is awful and everyone should stop being racist, then you might also think that the government should help poor people more and there should be more hospitals, and that rich people should pay more taxes. And you know, so sometimes this left block and this right block of things, and sometimes it's liberals and socialists and conservatives. Anyway, so you've had your conservatives, your liberals, and your socialists. Now, what else is there? There's fascists. Fascism is a type of authoritarianism where we don't have democracy anymore, and you can't choose who's going to be in government. You've just got one dude or one group of people who are in control, and they tell everybody else what to do, and you can't have any argument against them or say no, they control everything. And this was Hitler and Mussolini and Franco, and they're different from the communists because the communists are doing it, they're taking over as well, and they're saying you can't do what you want. But the communists like Stalin and those guys, they did it and they said you've all got to be equal now. Whereas the fascists like Hitler and all them, they did it and they said you've got to be unequal. You know, so if you're Jewish, we're gonna kill you, you know, and take all your stuff, and and saying that you can't have any sort of people wanting to be sharing things or whatever, and we're going to keep capitalism, and if you don't like capitalism, then you're going to go to prison, you know, and forcing everyone into this system, which is about inequality, you know, and also saying that if you're German, then you're better than somebody else, and women have to stay in the kitchen, and whatever, you know, and we're going to be racist, and we're going to be sexist, and we're going to be homophobic, and all this. And we're going to have a state that forces everyone to be like that, and no one's going to have any freedom, no democracy or whatever. So if you wanted to imagine a system that was the complete opposite of liberalism, then it would be like the Nazis or the fascists. So the fascists are you know, like Hitler and all that stuff. I can't really say that there's anything good about them really, because I don't think I'm being too biased by saying that fascism is bad and Hitler was a bad guy, but I mean, they said when they were doing it, they said that it was getting things done, and that by having sort of a strong leader telling everyone what to do and forcing them and killing everyone that they didn't like, and you know, killing all the old people so that they wouldn't be a problem and they wouldn't have to spend money on them and stuff, and killing all the sick people rather than helping them with healthcare, and then spending all your money on weapons and stuff, and all this, that meant that the country became strong and powerful, you know, and that, and if you were, you know, young and fit and had blonde hair and blue eyes and were German and weren't Jewish or nothing, and were rich as well, then it was brilliant, you know. But I mean, if you were Jewish or Gypsy or Roma or homosexual, or you didn't like capitalism or whatever, then it really wasn't good for you, you know. So anyway, so that's the extreme far right is like Hitler and all that, and sometimes you might find that there might be parties or groups today that call themselves extreme right, and they might say that they like Hitler and that they might want to use like the symbols from Hitler and all that, and you know, if you see someone with a Hitler swastika, then you know that he's a far right extremist and probably a racist and stuff, you know. Now on the other side, the other end, they've got the communists on the other end of the spectrum, and these guys, they also don't think that democracy is great. They think that if you have democracy, then people are just going to be stupid and vote for things that aren't really that great, and they're going to continue having capitalism, and they're going to continue having inequality and stuff. Whereas what you want to do is just sort of tell everyone that they've got to be equal, and that they've got to start sharing everything, and that no one's allowed to have any private property, and that there can't be any business people, and that the government's going to organise everything for everyone and give everyone what they need and tell everyone what they've got to do, and that you're doing this because you think that's going to be better than sort of people being free to do what they want. And you think that if people can vote in elections, then they're going to vote for people who aren't going to want to do what you want to do. You're not going to have the power to change things the way you want. And some of them thought that was better because it got things done, quickly. Whereas in liberal democracy, where people are sort of free to think what they want and to vote in elections, then you kind of have to go around sort of explaining things to people and sort of arguing and discussing with people and agreeing or disagreeing with them, and then what you end up with is sort of a compromise, of different ideas, and you're probably not going to get everything you want and get the complete power to completely control the world or the country and make it the way you want it. Whereas like the Nazis and the communists, they both can do that and say, well, we're going to make it the way we want it. So yeah, but I mean, most people I think today would agree that they don't like communism and that they don't like fascism, but sometimes when things go wrong in a country, when people are poor, or when there's a lot of trouble, economic problems or whatever, then sometimes people tend to start looking at the communists or the fascists and sort of thinking that would be better, because they want things to change quickly, so because in a democracy, in a free country, change sometimes takes longer to happen. It's harder to get things done because people disagree with each other and stuff, anyway, so those are sort of the basics, the basic political ideologies on the political spectrum. I mean, there are some other things as well. I mean, for example, environmentalism, which is people caring about the environment and saying that climate change is really bad and that pollution is really bad, and we've got to do a lot more to stop save the planet, and to not have the planet be destroyed. And they often call themselves green, and political parties that care about the environment and that's their top priority, they call themselves the Green Party usually. Sometimes conservatives in some countries don't like the Greens because they say that they want to change things too much, and they say they don't believe in all the stuff that the Greens are saying in science and stuff. But there's no reason why Greens have to be left wing or right wing or connected with this or that group. You can have a conservative government that cares about the environment, and you can have a socialist government that cares about the environment or whatever. For example, in Britain now, the Conservatives are in government, and they kind of do care about the environment, and they're sort of agreeing to try to change things and to sort of make it so that we're not destroying the planet so much. Whereas in America, they had when Trump was around, he was sort of saying he didn't care so much about the environment, and that. And they're both considered to be right wing and conservative, but they're both different in those ideas. Now, also in Germany now, that the left wing, the Socialist Party, is sort of friendly with the Greens, and the Socialists believe that we should change save the planet, and because the Socialists kind of agree with people giving up a little bit of freedom to have more for everybody, then that kind of sort of fits with the idea of the Greens, because you've got to give up a bit of your comfort and your wealth or whatever to make the planet better for everybody. So the idea of sort of sharing with everybody and sort of being in it together rather than sort of being selfish. I mean, that kind of fits the two. Whereas sometimes, like some of these conservative people, the people that like capitalism and all that, the anti-socialist guys, some of them think that selfish is good and that they want to be selfish, or that they think that being selfish is good. And you know, one of the reasons why people can't be so green is by being selfish. You know, I'm not going to throw my rubbish in this recycling bin. I'm just going to chuck it all out on the street, you know, because I don't care about anybody else, and it's too much hard work to bother about the environment. Or, you know, my business causes a lot of pollution, but I don't care about other people, you know. So it can, and it can be that also, if you're a person who doesn't like the idea of the government being too powerful because you live in a country where the government doesn't have that much control, then you might say, well, I don't want the government coming in and telling me what to do and saying it's with the environment, you know. Anyway, so you've got these Greens who care about the environment, and sometimes people who do that also have other ideas about other things as well. So you've got to just have a look and see, are they socialists as well as Greens, or are they liberals as well as Greens, or are they conservative as well as Greens, you know. But maybe the Greens. You've also got sort of nationalists, and nationalism usually sort of fits in with something else. But nationalism basically means that you think your country is great, and you think that being born in your country makes you better than people from other countries, or you think that your country should be for people who are in your country, and that you shouldn't have people coming there from other countries and joining you and changing it or whatever. And or it might be that you think that your country should go around sort of beating up other countries or whatever. But nationalism is sort of thinking about your country being great and thinking about things in terms of your particular country. So, you know, it can be that you're a big, powerful country and you want to make it a big thing out of that. Or it might be that you're a small country and that you're sort of being dominated by some other country and you want to get rid of their domination and be free from them. You know, so like the Nazis were nationalists, but their nationalism was like, Germans are the best and we're going to go and mess with everybody else and keep them down, you know, the Czechs and the Poles and the French or whatever, and be better than them. And sort of also the British Empire, that was nationalist, but that was nationalist like the British are the best and we're going to take over the world and control everybody else and make them do what we want, and the British be the masters. So that's one kind of nationalism, and that's sort of, I don't know what to say about that, but that's one kind. But then there's another kind of nationalism, which is if you're a smaller country and you are being sort of messed around with by somebody else who's maybe bigger than you, like you're Scotland, and you're sick of the English sort of telling you what to do and everything, then their Scottish nationalism is saying we don't want to be part of Britain anymore. We want to leave Britain and be sort of independent and have our freedom, you know. Or if you're if you're in Catalonia and in Spain and you consider yourself to be Catalan and that's your nation, and you want to be free and independent from Spain. Excuse me. Or maybe when the British Empire was a big thing, if you lived in Kenya, you might have been a Kenyan nationalist and been wanting to free Kenya from the British Empire, you know. So there are different types of nationalism, but nationalism is all about your country and sort of thinking about things in terms of the nation that you belong to in the country. And it might be that you like all the symbols and things about your country, and that you think your country is great, and you think that other people might be doing it down or sort of, you know, trying to destroy it or pull it apart somehow, you know, and you don't like that. You want to preserve and keep it, you know. So nationalism is about your country, you know. And then there's internationalism, which is sort of like saying, well, we don't necessarily care about just one country. We care about the whole world. We kind of want the whole world to come together more. So internationalism is sort of the opposite of nationalism in a way. And then you've got Well, I think that really covers it, really, all those ideas. You've got the big ones: socialism, conservatism, and liberalism. But then you've got, the extremes: fascism and communism. And then you've got sort of more particular things like nationalism and Greens, who kind of are concerned about different things. Um, and you might get like that they might come together or be joined, and there might be political parties that are bits and pieces of the different ones put together. Um, so, I mean, if you live in Britain and you're going to vote in an election, then if you think that the king and or the queen, the monarchy is good, you don't want to change that, and you think capitalism is great, and you think that socialism is a load of rubbish, and you think that we shouldn't be going on too much about women's rights or whatever, or that kind of thing, then you're probably going to vote conservative. And if you think that society is a bit unfair or needs to be fairer, or we need to protect things that help everybody, and we want to keep the state providing things for people like the hospitals and the schools and that, and you think you want rich people to pay more tax, and you want you might think that there's too much inequality between people, then you're going to go with the Labour Party, which is the Socialist Party. Anyway, as I said before at the beginning, sometimes a political party will have a clue in its name about what it's about, and sometimes it will be called something completely different that has no real relation to what it's about. So in America, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, well, America is a republic and it's a democracy, so it doesn't really give you any idea about what they believe, the name itself. So you have to sort of find out what they're all about, whether they're conservatives or whether they're liberals or socialists or whatever. And if I was Czech and I saw that I was going to go and vote, I wouldn't know what ODS was or whatever, and I find it really hard to make a decision. I'd have to find out more about what the names, what is Yes, what are they all about, Whereas in Britain, I find it a bit easier because you've got the Conservatives, you've got the Liberal Democrats, and you've got the Labour Party. Now, Labour is a bit of a weird name as well, but you can sort of guess that means socialist, because Labour means work, worker. Sometimes the name can be really misleading. So, for example, if I look back at the Nazis again, or Hitler's Nazi party was called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or National Socialist Party. So it's got the word socialist in it, and socialism, you think, really should be about people being equal and being the same, whereas the Nazis are all about being racist and sexist and homophobic and killing all the socialists and putting them in prison. But they had the name socialist in their title, which is a bit weird. So yeah, what's in a name, Romeo and Juliet. So hopefully, talking about socialism and liberalism and conservatism in this video can give you some vague idea about sort of what we're talking about with political ideas. Now, it might be that in your country it's a bit more complicated and people see things in different ways, but when you do that, then there's a way that we can sort of come back and explain it through history or through your culture, why it's like that, and then we can still relate that to these main ideas. But maybe I'm being a bit Anglophone and I'm sort of just talking about Britain really when I'm doing this, but if you are not British, then hopefully you can sort of understand these ideas. Anyway, yeah, there you go. That's the political ideologies.